Amanda Owen, a well-liked Yorkshire shepherdess, has finally opened up about her life after her divorce from her ex-husband. She is known for having a strong sense of independence, and her honest account reveals the harsh realities of their relationship. Let's take a closer look at what Amanda Owen has revealed and how it's changing how we perceive her life after the divorce. When they first met, their relationship seemed ideal because they had similar values and a similar sense of humor. As a power couple, or so it seemed, their early years were full of adventures, shared goals, and a mutual understanding that they were building something strong. Amanda, who was always the optimistic one, would often talk about how they were a team, how they complemented each other, how their life seemed full of potential, and how they both believed that their connection was unbreakable. The idea of starting a family together and creating a life that would make them proud was always part of the dream. But of course nothing is ever as perfect as it seems on the surface. Like all relationships, there's had its share of problems, but at the time, neither of them saw them as insurmountable. There were moments of uncertainty, minor arguments, and disagreements that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. They believed that their friends and family watched as the couple appeared to lead an ideal life, sharing milestones, raising their children, and achieving their goals. On the outside, Amanda and her ex-husband Clive were the couple that everyone envied, but as time went on, tiny cracks formed, and the connection that had felt unbreakable started to wane, but nobody noticed at first, not even Amanda. There wasn't anything she could specifically point to, but something was changing in their relationship. Clive, who had previously been very attentive and caring, began to emotionally distance himself. There were times when Amanda would reach out for support, but it wasn't there as it once was. At first, it was barely noticeable, but she knew something wasn't right, but she was determined to make things work because she was invested in the relationship and wanted the life they had created together to continue to flourish. She didn't want to give up, so she kept telling herself that everything would return to normal and that things would improve. It was evident that Amanda was in the early stages of a journey that would test her in ways she never expected. There was so much she didn't know, so much she would later realize, and so much she would be forced to confront the strain behind the scenes. They had been through difficult times before, and they had always come out stronger. But deep down Amanda knew that there were issues they couldn't ignore forever. What had begun as a fairy tale had slowly transformed into a reality where it was becoming harder to feel happy and fulfilled. Although Amanda loved her family and had high hopes for their future, the feeling that something was missing started to eat away at her, but not enough to make her consider giving up just yet. Since no marriage was perfect and they had both faced difficulties in the past, Amanda, the optimist, initially tried to minimize the cracks that had formed in her marriage with Clive, thinking that they were just a phase. However, this time, something felt different, and they initially chalked it up to the stress of managing busy careers and raising a family. Life was demanding, and both of them were always on the go. Amanda believed that the exhaustion from work, kids, and trying to juggle everything might be the cause of the problems taking its toll. She thought that once the dust settled, the tension would subside, but as time passed, the problems persisted and became harder to ignore. The once peaceful atmosphere in their home began to feel charged with tension, and there were more quiet moments when Amanda would try to talk to Clive, but the conversation would end or be met with distant responses. She noticed that he seemed to withdraw emotionally, no longer as present as he once was, and it wasn't just the silence, it was the lack of affection, the absence of the simple gestures that had once kept their bond strong. Was accustomed to being the strong one, the one who could weather the storm. She assured herself that things would improve and that their relationship could handle the difficulties they were facing, but she deep down couldn't get rid of the feeling that something more serious was amiss. One of the hardest things for Amanda was the way Clive's behavior had changed. He had always been a reliable person who supported her when she needed it, but now he seemed to be constantly busy and more aloof than ever. He was no longer the man who had once made her feel safe and loved, and Amanda would lie awake at night wondering what had happened to their connection during this time. She kept putting on a brave front, hoping that things would get better. She knew that many couples had difficult times, and maybe this was just one of those times when they would have to work harder to get back on track. However, it didn't take long for Amanda to realize that this wasn't just a temporary issue, that it wasn't something that could be fixed with a few heart-to-heart conversations or a weekend getaway. The distance between her and Clive seemed to grow with each passing day, and it wasn't just the emotional. The physical distance was another factor. They also stopped spending as much time together, and when they did, it frequently felt awkward and forced. The easy camaraderie they had once shared seemed like a distant memory. Amanda found herself in a difficult situation where she couldn't ignore the growing distance between them, but she didn't want to face the reality of it. Instead, she buried her feelings by concentrating on the day-to-day tasks of raising their children and keeping up the public image of a happy family. She continued to smile for the cameras, maintaining a united front to the world, even though she felt like she was slowly crumbling on the inside. It was not a single incident or argument that marked the turning point, rather, it was the accumulation of so many small moments and the gradual erosion of trust and connection that had caused Amanda and Clive to grow apart in ways that were impossible to repair, and neither of them seemed willing or able to put in the effort to rebuild what had once been a strong foundation, the love that had been there. It was one of those moments when you know something irreversible has happened. The tension between Amanda and Clive had been building for quite some time, and despite their best efforts to avoid it, there was no longer any denying it. The couple who had once been inseparable were now like strangers living under the same roof. For Amanda, the hardest part wasn't the arguments or the silent treatments, rather, it was the emotional disconnection, as she felt as though she was living with someone who no longer saw her and didn't care about her needs or desires. It felt like a distant memory that had been replaced by resentment and exhaustion. Amanda tried to determine when things had started to go wrong, whether it was when Clive stopped showing interest in her daily life or when they stopped sharing the small moments of joy that had once brought them closer together. After another long day of silence and missed opportunities for connection, Amanda sat in their living room one evening and looked out the window. She realized that she couldn't continue living this way because the love they had once shared had turned into something cold and distant that neither of them seemed capable of reviving at this point. The weight of the situation was negatively affecting her emotionally and mentally, and she had tried everything she could to fix things, but nothing worked. It felt like they were stuck in an endless loop of frustration with no way out. Be with someone who made her feel loved, supported, and seen rather than someone who had emotionally checked out and was just going through the motions. The decision wasn't easy, but it was becoming clearer every day. Amanda knew that if she continued in this relationship, it would only hurt her more because she was already emotionally spent and the toll it was taking on her mental health was becoming obvious. She had tried to be the strong one to bear the burden of the relationship and keep it together, but she now realized that strength didn't mean continuing to be in a toxic situation for both of them. The conversation was full of emotions and regret. Amanda had never wanted their marriage to end this way. She had dreamed of growing old with him and creating a life together, but life had other plans, so now all she could do was face the reality of what had been life after the divorce. It was painful because they couldn't fix what had been broken. The love they once shared had faded, and the respect and understanding that had held them together were no longer there. It was time to let go. Clive was shocked, and it was understandably filled with a lot of anger and sadness on both sides. The idea that Amanda and Clive would continue to work side by side at Ravenseat, their beloved Yorkshire farm, had come to an end, and with it the idea that they would continue to work side by side. However, despite their separation, they remained deeply connected to the land, their children, and the everyday life they had built together, so surprisingly, they continued working side by side. The decision to continue farming together after the divorce wasn't an easy one, but it was one that they both knew had to be made for the sake of their family. The emotional complexities of living together and sharing a business even after the marriage ended were enormous, but they set aside their personal differences for the greater good. The decision to stay on the farm and continue working with Clive was about more than just keeping things stable for the children. It was about a sense of duty to the land. They had worked so hard to cultivate a shared history that couldn't be easily erased by a divorce. Amanda's decision to stay on the farm and continue working with Clive was clear to those who followed their story. The logistical side of life at Ravenseat remained largely unchanged. They continued to work side by side, tending to the animals, managing the land, and ensuring that everything continued to run smoothly for their 9 children. From traditional, and it was something they both had to carefully manage. Of course, there were times when they felt conflicted as they attempted to reconcile their personal and professional obligations, but there was also a new kind of respect between them that was based on understanding and the love they still shared for their kids and the farm. Clive started to establish a routine that worked for their new working relationship. They no longer shared a bed, but they continued to share a vision for Ravenseat and their future there. The farm was more than just a source of income, it was a legacy, and despite everything that had happened, they felt a strong enough bond to not fully sever it. Their shared commitment to the farm became the cornerstone of their new working relationship, but there was a larger project on the horizon that would bring them even closer together. The restoration of a nearby stone barn, Auntie John's, which had long been a part of the farm's history. Although this arrangement may have seemed odd or even uncomfortable to outsiders, for Amanda and Clive it was just a new reality they had to get used to. They were no longer married, but they were still partners in a much deeper sense. They were co-workers, co-parents, and co-caretakers of the land. As the new project progressed, Amanda and Clive realized that this new chapter in their lives was providing them with an unexpected chance to re-establish themselves as business partners with a shared vision for their future. Despite the personal and emotional challenges they had faced, their journey was not over because of their shared love for their children and the land they had built together. Amanda finally tells the truth when they decide to continue working together on the farm after their divorce. Many people assumed that this decision was made out of practicality because they had 9 children, a farm to manage, and a farm to manage. The documentary series, which was intended to show their post-divorce lives, revealed something Amanda had been forced to hide for the sake of the farm and their children: the emotional strain of having to work so closely with someone she had once loved but now struggled to even be around. Although they had a legacy they weren't willing to let go of, it soon became clear that the reality of their arrangement was far more complicated than it seemed. The tension between them, which had previously been private, was now becoming public. Living and working side by side with Clive after everything they had been through was turning out to be more challenging than she had expected. Finally, she shares the truth about living with her ex-husband after their divorce, and it's not good. "I had to keep this a secret because everyone thought everything would be okay and that we would just continue as usual, but it hasn't been easy." Despite agreeing to work together for the benefit of the farm and their kids, the reality was far from simple. The emotional baggage of their marriage, the years of living in each other's shadows, and the personal pain from the divorce still lingered. Amanda wasn't naive. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't anticipated how much those old feelings would resurface. As if nothing had changed, the farm that had once been a shared dream was now a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The docu-series was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to show the world how they were co-parenting and continuing to farm together, but it only heightened the struggle Amanda had been going through in silence for so long. They were working side by side on the farm every single day while filming the documentary series, which only increased the pressure because the cameras were recording everything they did. It was about navigating a personal history that wasn't so easily erased. The farm was meant to be a place of healing, a place where they could continue to function as a family even after their marriage ended, but it frequently felt like Amanda was treading carefully in order to maintain the demanding routine of the farm while balancing the tension between them. At times, the cameras captured glimpses of their awkward interactions, but Amanda tried to put on a brave face, always keeping her eyes on the bigger picture: her children, the farm, and the legacy they had created. It wasn't always easy to hide how much it hurt to. Living and working with someone who was once her closest partner was never going to be easy for Amanda, but as the months went by, she realized how hard it was to maintain the delicate balance between professionalism and personal emotions with their children depending on them and the demands of the farm never stopping. Amanda found herself in a constant state of internal conflict, and she couldn't afford to let the strain of their working relationship affect the children or the farm. But it was getting harder and harder to maintain the facade as time went on, and she started to notice the toll it was taking on her. Amanda's world, which had seemed to be slowly coming back together after the divorce, was now falling apart in ways she hadn't anticipated. The secrets she had kept hidden were now out in the open, but the path forward was no longer clear once the layers of the marriage were peeled back. The revelation that Amanda had been hiding for so long was like a firestorm. Clive wasn't just an inconvenience, it was wearing her down mentally and emotionally. The farm had always been a place of refuge, a place where she could pour her energy into something tangible. The truth had been revealed. Had lived in a state of constant denial to protect herself and her family because the person she had once trusted the most was now someone she had to deal with newfound caution. Amanda's fallout came in a number of ways. On the one hand, there was the immediate response from those closest to her, who expressed sympathy and judgment about her decision to keep some aspects of her marriage private. Some felt that she should have been more forthright, believing that by keeping her struggles a secret, she had allowed things to get out of control. Others rallied around her, realizing that it wasn't easy to admit fault or weakness, especially when it came to something as important as personal as a marriage. But the children were also impacted. Amanda had always put their health first and knew that the truth about what had transpired between her and Clive would eventually affect them. She had taken care to protect them from the harsh realities of their divorce, but now there were more conversations to have and more questions to answer. Although Amanda did her best to ensure that the children didn't bear the brunt of the fallout, she knew that they were old enough to understand that something had changed between their parents. In the quiet moments when the youngest children were tucked in and the animals were cared for, Amanda would find herself thinking back on her decisions. She decided to keep working with Clive because it was the sensible thing to do for the family and the farm, but that didn't make the emotional burden any less heavy. Every conversation she had with Clive, whether it was about the needs of the farm or arranging childcare, felt like a reminder of the past and the life they had created together before everything fell apart. Do you like Amanda or Clive? Please let us know in the comments. Music.